Okay, final two stanzas of Charge of the Light Brigade, and they're really quite simple. In itself, Charge of the Light Brigade is quite a simple poem. You've got to capture the tone of Tennyson's delivery, that respect, that awe, that wonder, that remembrance. And you've got to think about why he did it, and think back to part one. He's the poet laureate, and he's got to capture the mood of the nation and the mood of the royal family. So here it's patriotism, it's propaganda, it's a sense of respect rather than blame for a catastrophic failure, for a battle where 2/3 of the soldiers suffered in it. So you've got to think about that all the way through. So the words, the phrases, the metaphors, the rhythm, all of it's quite simple, really. It is quite a simple poem. It's quite a memorable poem. It's an easy one to get in there. And as we finish off, I'll be thinking about one or two poems that you could look at, most of which are going to be contrasting in their tone. So, stanzas 5 and 6. Cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them, cannon behind them, volleyed and thundered, stormed at with shot and shell, while horse and hero fell. They that had fought so well came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell. All that was left of them, left of 600. When can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made, all the world wondered. Honour the Light Brigade, honour the charge they made, noble 600. Okay, so stanza 5, as I put up here, is a sort of mirror image, an echo of stanza 3. Stanza 3 was the charge. Stanza 5 is the retreat. So the only difference in the first three lines is that the cannons are now behind them instead of in front of them. So it's coming back from those jaws of death, reflected in the later words in the stanza. So you've got the difference between advance and retreat, the difference between bravery and loss. Now this isn't a retreat that we're supposed to criticise. This is a brave retreat. Those who had conquered the mouth of death, come back from inevitable death and survived. That's the tone of it. Not that they came back with their tail between their legs, if you like, but that they came back strongly. They came back out of certain death. They conquered death, if you like. We've got that sibilance of the shot and shell. You've got a nice bit of alliteration there, while horse and hero fell. And that H sound allows you to sort of linger and wallow and respect over the horse and heroes that have died. And remember that the Light Brigade were the men on horseback. And then looking towards the end there of that particular stanza, they that had fought so well, that tone of respect, came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell. And it's those two lines really that look at the sense of conquering of death. Remember, a lot of the poem is about the inevitability of their charge, the inevitability of their defeat, the inevitability of the catastrophe, but actually some of them survived. And that is captured by Tennyson here, that they've beaten death, they've conquered certain death and come back. And for him, it's a miracle that any did survive, and it's a testament to the glory of the British Army that 200 or so of them did come back alive to fight another battle. But we do have that slight change of tone, all that was left of them, left of 600. And there is always that tinge of regret, that tinge of loss, that so many of them did meet their end in this particular battle. Stanza 6 is all about how we should remember them. When can their glory fade? Look at that rhetorical question. And Tennyson isn't concerned with loss here. He's just concerned with keeping that memory alive. And the very fact that it's phrased as a rhetorical question suggests that Tennyson believes that their bravery will never die. When can their glory fade? Look at that use of a modal verb there, can, as if it's inevitable in a sense that we will remember them forever. And of course, through his poem, we do. And that in itself contrasts with the imperatives that come later on. Honour the Light Brigade, honour the charge they made. You've got those two imperatives with a sense of respect. There's a lot of exclamations there with the exclamation marks, and that "oh" here within this particular exclamation, "Oh, the wild charge they made," gives that sense of wonder and pride. And if you've got exclamation marks, we are drawn to the emotion behind those exclamations. An "oh" at the start gives a sense of that, that intake of breath, that sense of awe and wonder and respect that we're supposed to have for them. And the choice of the wild charge, as though they knew they were facing the certain death, but they did it nevertheless. It gives a sense of their toughness, their skill as soldiers. And then look at these three words: glory, honour and noble. All sorts of words from the semantic field of bravery and respect. Now, I've talked on other videos about other poems about how conclusions are so important for poets and for poems themselves, because it's the last thing that you are left with as a reader. These are the final thoughts of the poets. And in the final stanza here, stanza 6, it is very much a tone of respect and bravery. This is what Tennyson is guiding all his readers to think about. These are the last thoughts that he has, that no matter how inevitable, no matter how certain their death was, we should honour and respect their bravery and never forget the wild charge, never forget their glory. When can their glory fade? Think about that rhetorical question as well. And that leads me to the first of the comparisons. We might look at something like War Photographer, where Carol Ann Duffy ends with the idea of the war photographer going back over where he earns his living and they do not care, as he flies out to another battle, and the sense that battles never end in War Photographer, and that it's useless. That contrasts, that ending very much contrasts with Charge of the Light Brigade, because the fact is that what has ended is that particular battle, but what never ends is the glory of the soldiers of that battle. So that's a nice comparison there. But actually, most of the war sections of the poems really contrast with Charge of the Light Brigade, because Charge of the Light Brigade is all about glory and celebration and honour and respect, whereas all of the other poems really in the anthology that talk specifically about conflict in terms of war, all paint war in a negative way. I've talked about War Photographer. Look at Remains, how although he survived the soldier in Remains, he's left forever with the memory of what he's actually done. Now, there's an interesting similarity there, isn't there? That actually the sense of long-lasting memory lives through Remains as it does through Charge of the Light Brigade. But then you've got that contrast of the negative memories of Remains compared to the positive glory that we should remember the Charge of the Light Brigade with. So that's quite an interesting comparison. Then you've got Bayonet Charge, which is my first port of call, I think, when I teach this in class, because both of them use the word charge in the title. It's that sense of going towards an enemy, that sense of duty, and that does come through Bayonet Charge. And interestingly, in Bayonet Charge and in Charge of the Light Brigade, you've got some alliteration of H's for different reasons, which gives you an interesting point of comparison. In Bayonet Charge, though, you've got the sense of numbness. There's no real glory there. We get the sense that Ted Hughes is probably talking negatively about the effects of war, because it's made a soldier into a machine. But actually, that tone itself links quite nicely with Charge of the Light Brigade. I talked earlier about the symbol of theirs, as if all of them act as one, and they're not thinking individually, they are one part of the machinery of the army. So there's interesting links with the tone between Bayonet Charge and Charge of the Light Brigade. The one to really contrast it with, if you were looking at a complete polar opposite, would be Exposure by Wilfred Owen. This is a poem about glory, the glory of battle, the glory of dying for your country. Wilfred Owen, in a different poem, Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori, talks about the lie that it's honourable to die for your country, and Wilfred Owen's poems are all about the pity of war. And in Exposure, of course, the soldiers are facing their certain death, which links to this, but it's not a glorious death. It's a dismal, miserable, long, drawn-out death. Nothing glorious in that poem. So there's loads of really good contrasts with the overall tone that you could make between Charge of the Light Brigade and Exposure. But it sits well as a contrast with most of the other war poems, but there are little bits of particularly Bayonet Charge where you could make interesting comparisons that are similar, but Exposure's the one to go for to make a real opposite case for the treatment of war.